Throughout the years, Gundam has had many video games, some good, some not so good, and many falling somewhere in between. It's just a shame that only a fraction of them ever made it to the West. But even worse than that, did you know that there's actually quite a few cancelled Gundam games out there? And I'm not talking about mishandled live service games that had to be shut down in less time than it took to develop them. I'm talking about games that didn't even get a release. And for our first games, we have to go all the way back to 1983, the year that Roll Venture Kirosenshi Gundam Ichi Gundam Daichi Nitatsu, or Roll Venture Mobile Suit Gundam 1 Gundam Rising, was released on all major Japanese computers of the time. These being the PC-88, the PC-98, the X1, and the FM7. As the name indicates, this game was a role-playing adventure game hybrid based on the first episodes of the original Gundam. And anyone who's played one of those old RPGs will immediately feel right at home here. You get a short description of your surroundings, and you get a command prompt of what you want to do or where you want to go. And once you get through the exploration part, you get to the exhilarating action gameplay. It might all look primitive by today's standards, but when it was released, this game was actually praised for its graphics, and even more so for its voice samples and the intro song of the anime. However, you might have noticed another interesting thing about the gameplay on screen. You're not looking at a translated version. This is how the game shipped. So while this makes the game very accessible to us English-speaking Gundam fans, it did make the barrier of entry very high for the Japanese fans of the early 80s, and well, even still today for that matter. Plus, it's one of those games that relies on you having seen the anime. Obviously, you need the Gundam's manual before you can use it, but the only hint that the game gives you is that there's a white trapezium on the ground that could just literally be anything for someone who hasn't seen the anime. Roll Venture Kirosenshi Gundam ni Tobe Gundamu, or Roll Venture Mobile Suit Gundam 2 Fly Gundam, was the direct sequel to this game, released in June of 1984. It picks up where the previous game left off, and tells the story of the White Base as it tries to make its way back to Earth. Despite a total of 5 games being planned though, this would be the last one. Kirosenshi Gundam-san, Amuro Daso, and 2 other unnamed sequels would never see the light of day. From the early 80s then, we go all the way to the late 90s and the early 2000s, with Mobile Suit Gundam MSPlatoon.com. According to Unseen68.net, the game was first planned in 1997 when someone at Bandai came up with the idea of a Gundam game that would work over the internet. After a bit more brainstorming then, they decided that the perfect machine for this idea was the WonderSwan Color handheld. And for those of you who don't know what the WonderSwan is, or don't know its exact capabilities, think of it as something in between the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. So not immediately something that I think about when I hear online play. But anyways, the game was going to be a grand strategy game taking place during the One-Year War, and every week new missions would become available to fight in online matches against other humans. And by winning these battles, you would apparently be climbing the ranks of your faction until you eventually straight up became the leader of either the Federation or Zeon. So some really ambitious stuff, but perhaps not as impossible as you're thinking right now. Because on July 14th of 2000, Bandai released the WonderGate, an accessory for the WonderSwan that connected it to a compatible mobile phone through which it could then access the internet. This allowed for minigames to be downloaded, downloadable content to be downloaded, and in the case of MSPlatoon.com, online play. And in 2001, Bandai was ready to show this game to the world. The screenshots that we have honestly do look quite impressive for the hardware that it's running on, and the game was going to be released in fall of that same year. But instead of the game releasing, something else happened in the fall of 2001. On October 31st, 2001, Bandai released a statement saying that the Wondergate service was being discontinued. Some functions would still remain active after this date, but the main function that MS Platoon was going to be relying on was now dead in the water. So yeah, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the game was nearing completion and that there is like a version of it out there that's just waiting to be found and could very well be completely playable. And staying with the WonderSwan, according to GameFAQs, there's also a cancelled SD Gundam G Generation game for the WonderSwan, simply called SD Gundam G Generation for WonderSwan. But the problem is, I can't find any information about a game like this anywhere, and that is by looking in both English and Japanese. Maybe there really is a cancelled port of the first SD Gundam G Generation game for the WonderSwan, but right now, I think that it's more likely that SD Gundam G Generation for WonderSwan was some kind of placeholder title for one of the 3 G Generation games that were actually released on the console. And then somehow, both the working title and the actual title got their own GameFAQs pages. So then when someone stumbled upon SD Gundam G Generation for WonderSwan on GameFAQs and couldn't find any more information about it, they concluded that it must have been cancelled. If I find out any more information about this game or not game, I'll put it in the pinned comment. Our next cancelled game then is something that we do have more information about. At E3 2004, Bandai had a demo simply called Gundam Seed to show off the capabilities of the then upcoming Nintendo DS. Unfortunately though, while the DS did come out, nothing was ever heard again from this Gundam Seed demo, which is really a shame because even though it is clear that it still needed some work to be turned into a full game, it was functional, and we even have some footage of it. The visual presentation reminds me a lot of games like Encounters in Space and Never Ending Tomorrow, but supposedly the controls were all handled through the touchpad, which doesn't sound ideal, but does track for early DS games. They really like to push the touchpad. As with msplatoon.com then, I really hope that we can eventually get our hands on this demo. Even if it's only like 5 minutes worth of actual gameplay, I would love to try it out for myself. And finally then, we don't have a cancelled game, but a cancelled localization. That then in turn made many people in the West believe that the game itself was cancelled, myself included. Gundam Operation Troy was announced for the Xbox 360 in 2006, and it was even announced that it would be coming to the West as Mobile Ops: The 1 Year War. So as a 360 owner, I was initially quite hyped. A realistic-ish Gundam first-person shooter game was exactly what the Gundam and Halo-obsessed teenage me wanted. But then it felt like there was just a whole lot of nothing, I kind of forgot about the game, and the next time that I then looked it up, I saw it listed on GameFAQs as cancelled. So I just moved on with my life and actually completely forgot about it. Until many years later, when I saw a used copy of it in a Japanese game store. And for only 100 yen, I wasn't going to say no to that. So, as it turns out, the game was released in Japan, after some delays, and it was just a Western release that got canned. And unfortunately, I can kinda see why. In the West, first-person shooter games are a dime a dozen, And Operation Troy wasn't exactly revolutionary. The online mode only supported 5 versus 5 matches, the graphics were disappointing, the physics were janky, the gameplay was mediocre, and the maps were badly made for the kind of game that Operation Troy wanted to be. You could play as just infantry, or you could get inside of a mobile suit, something that was an obvious huge scale difference. So rather than having small and big maps for mainly infantry and mainly mobile suit battles respectively, most of the maps were made as somewhere in between, making them too big for the infantry, but too small for the mobile suits. Still, despite all of these issues, the game was apparently well received in Japan. And because this is the only game on this list that was actually released, you can find out for yourself. Just be warned though that this isn't one of the small number of region-free 360 games, so you'll need either a Japanese 360 or other means. And those were all of Gundam's cancelled video games. So let me know down below which one you would love to try, and if you think that I missed one, you can also leave that down below. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great day, and I'll see you all next time.